In a distant galaxy far from Earth, there was a powerful alien queen. Her empire was vast and feared by many. She had ruled for centuries, and no one had ever dared to challenge her or her warriors. The queen's most feared fighter was a champion strong, skilled, and nearly invincible. His name was Kaler, and he had never been defeated in battle. The alien empire looked up to him as a symbol of their might and power. One day, the queen, feeling confident in her rule, issued a public challenge. She announced that anyone brave enough to face her champion in combat would have the chance to gain great honor. The challenge was not just for warriors of other alien races. It was a challenge for anyone, anywhere in the galaxy, the queen believed. No one would ever succeed. For Kaler's strength was unmatched. Word of the queen's challenge spread quickly across the stars. And it didn't take long for the news to reach Earth. Humanity was just beginning to make its mark in the galaxy, and their reputation had yet to grow beyond being a curious, primitive species. Yet one human captain, Jack Holloway, was known for his boldness and his unrivaled skills in combat. He had fought in wars across his own world, surviving battles where most would have perished. When Jack heard about the challenge, something deep inside him stirred. His pride, and perhaps a little curiosity, pushed him to accept. He had no fear of the alien champion or the queen's empire. Humans were known for their resilience, and Jack had always believed that the impossible was only an obstacle to be overcome. He made his way to the queen's planet, a world unlike any he had seen before. The planet was vast, with tall spires and cities that seemed to pierce the clouds. The air was thick with tension as Jack arrived at the royal palace. It was clear that his arrival was not expected, and whispers of the human warrior spread like wildfire through the palace. When the time came, Jack entered the grand arena. The floor was made of stone and gold, shining brightly in the sunlight. The alien crowd gathered, their eyes fixed on the newcomer. They had never seen a human before, and the idea that one would challenge their mightiest warrior was almost laughable to them. Many of them thought Jack would be easily crushed by Kaler, and they looked on in anticipation of the human's failure. Standing in the center of the arena was Kaler, the champion of the queen. He was towering over the ground, his muscles rippling beneath his armor. His eyes were cold and calculating, the eyes of a true warrior who had never known defeat. He looked down at Jack, sizing him up, almost amused by the idea of facing someone so small, so fragile in comparison. The queen herself sat high in the royal stands, her regal face as impassive as ever. She was the heart of this empire, and her pride in Kaler was unshakable. She believed he was unbeatable, and she watched with a sense of calm amusement. Knowing that the challenge would end in victory for her champion, Jack stepped forward into the center of the arena. His expression unwavering. He was no stranger to combat, and his confidence was clear. The weapons they were given for the fight were simple but deadly swords, shields, and strength. Jack gripped his sword firmly, his eyes fixed on Kaler. The alien champion raised his own weapon, a large blade that seemed to glow with an otherworldly energy. He let out a loud, guttural laugh, mocking the human in front of him. "You are brave, little one, but bravery won't save you here. I have killed many, and you will be no different." But Jack remained silent, his focus sharp. He was not here to boast, not here to make promises. He was here to prove something to himself, to the galaxy, to the queen who watched from above. The fight began with a loud clash as Kaler charged forward. His speed was incredible, and his strength was even greater. The crowd gasped as he swung his blade with such force that it seemed like it could split anything in its path. Jack barely had time to react as he raised his shield, blocking the first strike. The impact sent a shockwave through his body, but he stood his ground. He was stronger than he looked. With a swift movement, Jack countered, ducking beneath Kaler's next swing. The alien champion, surprised by the human's agility, tried to bring his sword down again, but Jack was faster. He ducked, dodged, and moved in ways Kaler had never seen before. His combat experience wasn't just about strength. It was about strategy, speed, and the ability to read his opponent's every move. The fight was fast-paced, and the tension in the air grew heavier with each passing second. Kaler, although powerful, began to show signs of frustration. He was used to overwhelming his opponents with sheer force, but this human was different. He fought with an unpredictable grace, making Kaler's attacks miss by mere inches. Finally, the moment arrived. As Kaler swung his blade with all his might, Jack seized the opportunity. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped the attack and struck out, his sword slicing through the champion's armor. The sound of metal tearing through flesh echoed across the arena, and the crowd went silent. Kaler's eyes widened in shock as he looked down at the wound. Realizing too late that his opponent was not someone to be taken lightly, Jack, with one final, precise move, brought his blade down, splitting the champion in half with a single strike. The arena was still, the echo of the clash hanging in the air. The queen's eyes were wide in disbelief. Her champion, her pride, had been defeated by a human. She had never considered such a possibility. The power dynamic of the entire empire was now in jeopardy. The silence that followed was deafening, and the human, standing victorious over the fallen champion, finally spoke. "This is not a victory for me," he said calmly, his voice carrying across the arena. "It's a reminder that no one is invincible, not even you." The queen could only stare in stunned silence as the humans' words hung in the air. What had just happened? Was this the beginning of something new, or was it the end of everything she had known? The arena was silent, a stillness that hung heavy in the air. The mighty champion Kaler was defeated. His massive form lay motionless on the ground, his blood staining the golden arena floor. The alien crowd, who had once cheered for him as their hero, now stood frozen in shock. They had never seen anything like this before. A human had done what no one, not even their fiercest warriors, could have ever imagined. Jack stood over Kaler's lifeless body, his sword dripping with the champion's blood. His chest rose and fell with each breath, but there was no joy in his victory. He had done what he came to do, but there was no celebration, no triumph in his heart. The human was not a man who fought for glory, but for the thrill of proving that he could survive in a world that was not his own. He had faced the impossible, and now, against all odds, he had won above in the royal stands. The queen watched, her face pale and unreadable. Her sharp, calculating eyes were fixed on the human who had defeated her greatest warrior. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. The queen had known power her entire life. She had ruled for centuries and had seen many battles, but never had she witnessed a fight like this. Never had she seen a single human conquer her champion with such skill and precision. A deep, unspoken anger brewed within her. Her pride, her belief in the invincibility of her people, had been shattered in an instant. She had never expected this. How could she? The human soldier, this mere earthling, had taken down her strongest fighter without so much as a moment's hesitation. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, but she said nothing. The court had fallen into a tense silence, awaiting her decision. The queen's advisor, a small but wise alien named Vrak, stepped forward. His eyes were wide with concern. "Your Majesty," he said cautiously, "what will happen now? The human has defeated Kaler. He is now the victor, by law." The queen's gaze never left Jack. She knew the ancient laws of her empire. When a champion was defeated, the conqueror had the right to claim anything they wished, even the queen herself. This was the law. There was no way around it. The loss of Kaler wasn't just a personal blow to the queen, it was a loss to her entire empire. What should I do? She asked herself quietly, almost to no one in particular. She had always been in control, always been the one who made the rules. Now it was the human who held the power. She had never been faced with such a situation, and the reality of it made her feel vulnerable for the first time in centuries. She was not used to feeling weak. Without another word, she stood up from her throne and motioned for the guards to escort Jack to her chambers. The human soldier, standing still in the center of the arena, knew that his life was about to change forever. He didn't know what the queen would do, but he was ready for whatever came next. He had already proven himself in combat, Nothing could intimidate him now. As Jack entered the Queen's private chambers, he was met with a cold, calculating stare. The Queen's beauty was undeniable. She was tall and regal, with silver hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. Her skin shimmered with an ethereal glow, and her eyes dark as the void bore into him. She was a queen, a ruler, and she had never been challenged like this before. Jack, however, was not impressed by her beauty. He had seen many powerful people in his life, but none of them had ever commanded the kind of respect that she seemed to have earned. He simply stood there, waiting for her to speak. "You defeated Kaler," the Queen said, her voice calm, but with a dangerous edge. "A feat no one in my empire thought possible. You have earned the right to ask for anything, but I warn you, do not mistake this for weakness." Her eyes narrowed. As she spoke, "I may be forced to honor your victory, but I will not do so happily." Jack met her gaze, unflinching. "I didn't come here for power or riches," he said, his voice steady. "I only came to prove that humans can be as strong as any other species. I've fought for my life, and I'm still standing, that's all." The Queen looked at him, studying him carefully. She could sense his strength, his confidence, and even his humility. There was something about this human that intrigued her. She had thought of him as nothing more than a nuisance, but now, as she looked at him, she realized there was more to him than met the eye. "Could have you executed," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You've humiliated me, and the law demands punishment for such an offense. But I'm not a fool." She paused, her eyes flickering with a new thought. "Perhaps it's time for a new law, one that includes you." Jack frowned, confused. "What are you saying?" The Queen took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. "The laws of my empire state that the victor may claim the defeated warrior's title. Kaler's title was not just of strength, but of loyalty to me. Now, by law, you are entitled to claim not just Kaler's place, but also my own." Her lips curled into a small, almost amused smile. "I will become your concubine, along with my maids. This is the law. Will have power over me, as much as you wish." Jack was taken aback. He had not expected this. The Queen, a ruler of a vast empire, was offering herself to him as if she were no more than a servant. He had won the battle, but this was something he had not prepared for. He wasn't sure how to respond. The Queen watched him closely, her expression hardening once more. "If you refuse, I will have you thrown into the dungeons. The choice is yours. But remember, this is the law." Jack hesitated, unsure of what to do. The Queen's offer was not one he could take lightly. Yet as he stood before her, he knew that his life had already been changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. This was more than just a fight. It was a turning point, a moment that would shape the future of both him and the Empire. The news of Jack's victory spread quickly through the palace. The alien queen, once feared and respected, now stood before him, offering herself and her maids as a part of the law's binding ritual. The human soldier, who had never expected anything more than a fight, now found himself at the center of a much greater and more dangerous game. The ritual would take place in the Grand Hall, and all of the Queen's court would witness it. The day of the ritual arrived, and the Grand Hall was filled with tension. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers and the sound of soft whispers. The Queen, dressed in a gown of shining silver and gold, stood at the center of the room. Her beauty was unmatched, but her expression was a mask of control and cold calculation. She had never been in a position like this before. Human, someone from a primitive planet, was about to hold power over her. She would have to face this reality, no matter how painful it was. Jack entered the hall, his posture straight and his eyes determined. He had won the battle, but now he faced something much more complicated. He had never expected to become the center of so much power and attention. His thoughts were clear. He was a soldier, not a ruler. But the laws of the alien empire had placed him in a position he had never asked for. It was a strange feeling to be both a conqueror and a servant. To his own conscience, as he stepped into the hall, all eyes were on him. The Queen's courtiers watched with curious eyes, wondering what would happen next. Some were excited by the thought of change, while others were unsure of what Jack's victory would mean for their future. The maids, loyal to their queen, stood in a line to the side. They were elegant and poised, but there was an air of uncertainty around them. They had never expected to be placed in such a position either. The queen's voice echoed through the hall. "This is the ritual," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of something deeper, something she couldn't quite hide. "At a laws of my people, this human is now my conqueror. As such, he has the right to claim me and my maids as his own. This is the way it must be. We cannot go back." Jack stood still, his mind racing. He had no idea what this ritual would entail. He had heard of the traditions of other empires, but nothing like this. The queen had offered herself as part of the law, but the idea of claiming her, of holding power over her, felt strange. She was a ruler, someone who had commanded entire worlds, and now she was bound by the laws of her empire to serve him. The queen looked at him, her eyes sharp. "You are my conqueror now. You are bound by the law to claim your reward. Will you do so?" she asked, her tone leaving little room for hesitation. Jack hesitated. His thoughts were all over the place. He had fought for survival, not for power. He was not a man who craved control over others. The law was the law. If he refused, he knew that there would be consequences. The queen, for all her power, could not ignore the law of her empire. He had no choice. "I will," Jack said, his voice steady, though his mind was full of doubt. The moment those words left his mouth, he realized that his life, as well as the lives of the queen and her maids, would never be the same. The queen stepped forward, her eyes never leaving his. She was beautiful, but there was something in her eyes now that he hadn't seen before. It was not just pride or defiance. It was something more, something human perhaps. She was a ruler, but she was also a woman who had been forced into a position of vulnerability. Jack could see that now. The queen's maids stepped forward as well. Each of them was graceful and elegant, their expressions serious. They had always served the queen, and now, under the law, they were to serve Jack. It was a strange thing to witness these proud women, who had once held power in their own right, now standing before him, their fates tied to his decision. The queen's voice broke the silence. "The law requires that we bow to you now," she said, her words carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. "We are yours, as per the law of our people. We have no choice but to serve you." Jack's mind spun. He had never asked for any of this. He was a soldier, a warrior, not a ruler. Yet here he was, the ruler of an alien queen and her maids, by law. The weight of it was almost unbearable. How could he lead them? How could he control them? They were not just servants. They were powerful women, each of them with their own strengths and dignity. He looked at the queen, his eyes searching hers for some kind of answer. "I don't want power over you," he said, his voice softer now. "I came here to fight. I didn't come to take over your empire." The queen studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, for the first time since they had met, she softened. "The law is not something I chose," she said quietly. "It is the tradition of my people. You're bound by it. And now you are as much a part of it as I am. What happens next is up to you." Jack felt a sense of responsibility wash over him. He couldn't change the law, but he could choose how he treated those who were now bound to him. He didn't want to be a cruel ruler, but he knew that he had to be firm. The queen had lost her champion, her greatest warrior. Her pride had been shattered, and now she and her maids had been bound by law to serve him. The ritual was not just about power, it was about survival and the choice to do what was right in a world that made no room for weakness. Jack had won, but his victory had opened a door to a new and uncertain future. He could choose to rule with kindness, or he could choose to rule with an iron fist. The question was no longer about what he had done, but about what he was going to do next, as the ritual ended. The queen bowed her head, her face a mixture of pride and acceptance. Jack, for his part, did not feel victorious. He did not feel like a conqueror. He only felt the heavy weight of what came next. The days following the binding ritual felt like a strange dream to Jack. He had arrived on this planet expecting nothing more than a fight to prove humanity's strength. But now he found himself in control of a vast empire, bound by the laws. Of a people he barely understood, the queen, once a fierce ruler, was now his servant, and her maids, her trusted aides, were also bound to him. It was a strange feeling to have power over such powerful beings, and Jack struggled to understand how to navigate his new life. The queen, as regal as ever, still held an air of command. Her pride had been wounded, but she had accepted the terms of the law. She had done what was required of her, but that didn't mean she was ready to bow to Jack entirely. There were moments when her eyes flashed with defiance, and Jack could see that she still considered herself above him despite the law. Jack had no desire for power. He had never been interested in ruling anything. He was a soldier, used to following orders, not giving them. But now, the choices before him were different. He could choose to rule with kindness, or he could choose to rule with strength. The people in this empire were waiting for him to make decisions that would affect their lives. Away, they were watching him for any signs of weakness. The queen, despite her submission to the law, continued to advise Jack on matters of the empire. She was still a leader, and her knowledge of politics and war was far beyond anything Jack had ever known. She spoke with confidence, her words sharp and calculated. But there were moments when Jack saw something in her eyes, something more than the cold, calculating ruler she appeared to be. She was trapped in a web of her own making, and Jack knew that. She was no longer the queen in control of her empire, but a prisoner of the law, bound to serve him. One afternoon, Jack walked through the palace's great hall. The air was filled with the soft sounds of distant voices, the scent of foreign flowers drifting through the open windows. His footsteps echoed as he made his way to the queen's chambers. When he arrived, the doors were already open. He stepped inside, finding the queen seated at a large table, poring over documents that held the fate of her empire. She looked up as he entered, her expression calm but distant. "You've been quiet lately," Jack said, leaning against the doorframe. "I thought you'd have a lot more to say by now." The queen's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she spoke. "I am still adjusting to my new reality," she replied, her voice steady. "You may have defeated Kaler, but you have not yet earned my respect. Power cannot be given. It must be earned. If you think for a moment that I will bow to you just because the law says I must, you are mistaken." Jack's eyes softened. "I don't want you to bow to me," he said, his voice low. "Never asked for any of this. I came here to fight, and now I don't know what to do. You've been through a lot, and so have I, but we have to figure this out. We can't just go on like this forever." The queen's expression softened, but only for a moment. "You think you can change the way things work here? Why do you think the laws of my empire will just bend because of your human ideals?" Walked toward him, her movements fluid. "I do not need your sympathy, human. I need strength. If you truly want to rule, you must understand that. You must be prepared to make decisions that will affect the lives of millions. You must be ruthless when necessary. Your feelings for me do not matter. What matters is how you lead this empire." Jack felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He didn't want to be ruthless. He didn't want to be a ruler. He just wanted to go back to his simple life, where his only responsibility was survival. But now, his choices affected more than just his own fate. He had to consider the people of this empire, the consequences of his actions, and the future of the galaxy. The weight of it was heavier than he had imagined. "Then teach me," Jack said, his voice firm. "I don't know how to do this, but I want to learn. I want to understand. I didn't come here to destroy everything. I want to make sure we don't fall apart." Queen studied him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the determination. He was not like the other conquerors she had known. He was not driven by a lust for power. But he had something she respected: courage, a willingness to learn, and a desire to protect. She had been a queen for so long, but now, perhaps she could learn something from him. "I will teach you," the queen said, her voice softer now. "But you must promise me one thing. You will not let this empire fall. You will not let it crumble under the weight of your indecision." Jack nodded. I promise. The Queen nodded in return. Then we begin. Over the next few days, Jack and the Queen spent long hours together, discussing the matters of the Empire. She taught him about the inner workings of the court, the delicate balance of power that kept the peace. She explained the politics of the galaxy, the different factions that ruled over various worlds. Jack listened carefully, asking questions, trying to understand the complex web of relationships that govern this empire. At first, he struggled to keep up. Concepts were foreign to him, and the political maneuvering was unlike anything he had experienced on Earth. But as time passed, Jack began to grasp the intricacies of ruling. He started to make decisions, small at first, but with each choice, he grew more confident. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a leader, whether he liked it or not. The Queen, for her part, began to see Jack in a new light. He was not just the human who had defeated her champion. He was someone who could become a true ruler. Although she would never admit it aloud, she respected him for it. In a strange way, he had earned her respect not through force, but through his willingness to learn and to grow. The days passed in a blur for Jack. He was no longer just a soldier. He had become something far more complicated. He had taken on the mantle of leadership, learning the ways of the Queen's empire and the delicate balance of power that kept it intact. The Queen, though her pride had been shaken, had been teaching him the ins and outs of ruling a vast and complex empire. At first, Jack had felt overwhelmed by the enormity of the task, but now something was changing inside him. He could feel the weight of responsibility growing heavier with each passing day. The Queen had not made it easy for him. She had been a fierce and proud leader, and she wasn't about to hand over control of her empire without testing him. But slowly, Jack had gained her respect. She had seen that he wasn't just some primitive human as she had initially thought. He had the courage to question the rules and the wisdom to listen and learn. He wasn't like the other conquerors, who came and went, seeking only to control and destroy. Jack was different. Despite the progress Jack had made, there were still those who opposed his rise to power. The empire was not a simple place, and there were many factions within the court who resented the idea of a human having any control over their queen. These factions, powerful and influential, had been quiet for now, but Jack could sense the growing tension in the air. They were watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. One afternoon, as Jack walked through the palace halls, he was greeted by a group of high-ranking officials. They were the ones who had supported the Queen for years, the ones who had kept the empire running smoothly before his arrival. They had tolerated his presence, but they had not accepted him as a true ruler. "You're making a mistake," one of them, a tall alien named Veros, said. He had dark eyes and sharp features, a man who was used to getting his way. "You may have defeated Kaler, but that does not make you fit to rule an empire." Jack stopped in his tracks. "I'm doing the best I can," he replied. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "I didn't come here to ruin things. I came here to help. If you have a better idea, I'm all ears." Veros sneered. "Your idea of helping is nothing more than weakness. This empire has survived for centuries because of strength, not because of your human ideals. You think you can lead us with kindness? That is not the way of this galaxy." Jack clenched his fists. He had heard this kind of talk before. The old ways. The idea that strength and power were the only things that mattered. He had never believed in that. But he knew that these men held real power within the empire, and if they turned against him, things could spiral out of control quickly. "I don't believe in ruling through fear," Jack said, his voice steady. "But that doesn't mean I'll back down if things get out of hand. You'll see that I can lead. But I'll do it my way, not the old way." Veros's expression darkened. "We'll see," he muttered, before turning and walking away with his companions. Jack watched them leave, a feeling of unease settling in his chest. He knew he had made enemies, but he hadn't realized just how much. The Queen's empire was built on power, and many of the people in her court would not accept a human ruler so easily. The political landscape was more complicated than he had imagined, and Jack was beginning to realize that his every decision could make or break the fragile peace that held the empire together. That evening, Jack sat with the Queen in her private chambers. She was reviewing documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jack, however, had something else on his mind. "I spoke with some of your people today," he said, his voice low. "They don't like me. They think I'm weak." The Queen glanced up at him, her eyes piercing. "They always think that," she replied. "It's not just you. The ones who oppose me see anything that threatens their position as weakness. They'll never accept you unless you show them that you can command respect. And that doesn't come from kindness alone." Jack sighed. "I don't want to rule by fear," he said, his frustration clear. "I don't want to be like them, but I also don't want to see this empire fall apart." The Queen set her documents aside and leaned forward. "You're in a difficult position," she said, her voice softer now. "You're not like them, but that doesn't mean you can't be strong in your own way. Power isn't just about control. It's about influence. And right now you have the power to shape this empire, but only if you can convince them that you can lead." Jack thought about her words. He had never wanted to lead, but now it seemed that it was inevitable. The empire was his responsibility, whether he liked it or not. He had to find a way to make it work, to prove that he could be the leader they needed. But how? The answer wasn't clear. But Jack knew one thing: he wasn't going to give up. He had come too far, and there were too many lives at stake. He had to find a way to bring the people together, to unite them under his leadership. He couldn't afford to fail. The Queen watched him closely. "I see the fire in you," she said quietly. "It's there. But you'll need more than just determination to succeed. You'll need allies. And you'll need to learn to navigate the politics of this empire. It's not just about strength, Jack. It's about understanding people. You have to know who you can trust." Jack nodded. He was starting to understand. The challenge before him was not just about physical strength or skill in battle. It was about winning the hearts and minds of the people who would follow him. He had to be more than just a warrior. He had to be a leader in every sense of the word. The tension in the air grew thicker as Jack and the Queen continued their conversation. Jack knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to prove himself. The empire was at a crossroads, and only time would tell if he was the one who could bring it into a new age. But one thing was certain: he would not back down. The weight of the crown now rested on Jack's shoulders. He had never asked for this, but the law of the alien empire had made him its leader. The Queen, once an all-powerful ruler, was now bound to serve him, as were her loyal maids. Jack had come to this world to prove humanity's strength, but now he faced a greater challenge than he had ever expected: the future of the entire empire. Despite his growing understanding of the complexities of ruling, Jack knew he still had a long way to go. He had no intention of ruling through fear or cruelty, but the court was divided. Many factions still resented his presence, and some were growing increasingly bold in their opposition. Jack had tried to win their trust with kindness, but kindness alone was not enough to rule an empire. The Queen, although bound by the law, had been a valuable ally. She had shown him how to navigate the treacherous world of politics, how to manage the court's many factions, and how to lead with both strength and wisdom. But Jack's leadership was still being tested. Every decision he made was watched, closely analyzed by those who wanted him to fail. One day, as Jack sat in the royal chamber, he was joined by the Queen. She had not spoken much to him in recent days, her eyes filled with quiet contemplation. It was clear that her mind was on something important. "Something is brewing," the Queen said, her voice quiet but serious. "There are whispers in the court. They are growing bolder." Jack leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "The factions that oppose you," she explained. "They are not content with merely watching. They are starting to act. There are rumors of plans to destabilize your rule, to challenge your authority." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had known that the court was divided, but hearing that some of the factions were planning to actively oppose him was unsettling. He had hoped that his efforts to unite the empire would have worked, but it seemed that the divisions ran deeper. Then he had realized. "Is there anything I can do?" Jack asked, his voice low. The queen studied him carefully. You must make your presence felt. Show them that you will not be intimidated. But be careful. If you are too harsh, you risk pushing those who might still support you into the arms of your enemies. You must find a balance. Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He could not afford to be weak, but he also could not afford to alienate potential allies. He had to be both firm and strategic. The future of the Empire depended on his ability to navigate this delicate balance. For the next few days, Jack worked tirelessly, meeting with advisors and courtiers. Learning more about the factions that opposed him, he spent hours reviewing old treaties, listening to the concerns of the people, and trying to find ways to win over those who were still undecided. But the longer he stayed in the palace, the more he realized that his position was precarious. There were too many who viewed him as an outsider. Too many who still thought of him as a human, as not a ruler. It was during one of these meetings that Jack received unexpected news. Varos, one of the most influential members of the court, had publicly called for a vote of no confidence in Jack's leadership. The challenge had come sooner than Jack had expected, and it was clear that Varos was not going to back down. The support of Varos and his allies would be critical. Without it, Jack's position could be compromised. Jack knew he had to act quickly. He gathered the queen and her maids, along with his most trusted allies, to discuss a plan. Decide how to respond to Varos's challenge. I need your help, Jack said, addressing the queen. I can't do this alone. The queen, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. You must show them that you are not just a soldier, but a leader. You must take control, not just of the court, but of their hearts and minds. If they see weakness in you, they will take advantage. But if they see strength, they will follow. Jack looked around the room. The queen's words had struck a chord with him. He had always believed that strength came from the ability to fight, to win battles. But now, he realized that true strength came from knowing when to fight and when to show restraint. He had to make a choice. He could meet Varos's challenge head-on, or he could find another way to gain control of the Empire. After a long pause, Jack made his decision. We will not fight them with force, he said, his voice steady. We will fight them with strategy. We will turn their plans against them, use their own weaknesses against them. It's time to show them that we will not be easily defeated. The queen nodded in agreement. It is a wise choice. The power of the court lies in perception. If you can control the narrative, you can control the Empire. Jack turned to her. How do we do that? The queen smiled, a glint of respect. In her eyes, we play their game. We take their challenge and use it to our advantage. We will not allow them to take the throne from you. Over the next few days, Jack and the queen worked together, carefully planning their next move. Crafted a strategy that would expose the weaknesses of Varos and his allies, while at the same time building support among the neutral factions in the court. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience, precision, and a deep understanding of the Empire's political landscape. When the day of the vote came, Jack stood before the court with the queen by his side. The air was thick with tension. As the factions gathered, ready to cast their votes, Varos stood at the front, his expression cold and calculating. Jack, however, was calm. He knew that he had done everything he could to prepare. The court may have been divided, but he was determined to prove that he could lead this empire into a new era, one that was not built on fear, but on unity and strength. As the votes were cast, Jack's heart raced. He had made his choice. Now, it was time to see if the court had chosen him as their leader.